Hey guys, this is Greg Jones for DragTheBar.com, and today I'm bringing you the third video in the Tools of the Trade series. This video is entitled Preparation, Learning the Game, and it's going to be a video that focuses on how I think beginning and struggling players should approach learning sit and goes. It's something I probably should have done a long time ago actually, but I had a few inspirations for this video recently that kind of got into my mind. One of the things is that I'm working with a few of the Drag the Bar forum members, and one of the forum members, Charet, is sort of playing at the $3.40 level and struggling to figure out why he is not having better results. And it's funny because I think everything you need to know to learn how to play sit and goes at a fundamental level is in the ABC SNG series. But the problem is sort of organizing that information and coming up with a strategy to actually learn it. Although it's very easy to sort of learn something in a way where if you think about it, if you have a lot of time to think about it, you can probably come up with the right answer. You know, taking all that information and getting it locked in your brain in a way where you can unconsciously know the right answer and move quickly is difficult. And there's a pretty concrete method for doing this, or at least I think I can create a roadmap for you to do this, and it's sort of based on the way that people learn in general. So this may seem like a very basic video, but I would caution you not to disregard it out of hand as being too fluffy or too basic, even if you're sort of at an intermediate point in your game, because actively approaching learning is going to allow you to learn information much faster, and this is sort of an approach to sort of categorize and bin all the information in the ABC SNG series and work on things one step at a time, because if you try to take it in all at once, you may not get any of it, but if you sort of lock in and master certain skills, then it'll create the proper foundation for building off of that on a little bit harder to learn skills. So with that said, let's get going. It's my feeling that beginners a lot of times struggle with where to start learning, because a new subject is so vast, and teaching tools like Drag the Bar and coaching and things are good because they basically force someone to start in a certain place, but there's so much information on a site like Drag the Bar. Even of the videos I've made so many videos now that, you know, a beginner coming to the site and sort of looking would say, okay, well, ABC SNG, that makes sense because that sort of looks like, let's start here. But you know, there's at least 7 videos in that series. They're in order, but you know, it's a struggle to take in that much information at once. Many times, beginning players sort of want to improve but don't know what to fix, so getting that starting point of here's what you focus on first and here's what you focus on second is really the most important thing. And a lot of times they have so many problems, either problems that they do know that they have, but they just haven't actually fixed yet, and then there are also problems that they don't know that they have, and that takes a little bit more time to focus somebody on. Sometimes coaching is the only way to get people aware of those types of problems, but obviously pointing them out in videos and that sort of thing is going to, you know, resonate with some people. They're going to say, oh, I have that problem too. So these kind of videos are really good places to get information. Now, it's my feeling that almost all beginners need to start from a fixed strategy that's basic and verifiable, in the sense that there's really no gray area. It's either right or wrong. And it's sort of the way that a lot of things in life are taught. One of the analogies I've always given people is with martial arts, which I grew up doing when I was young. It resonates with some people, but not with others. However, you know, if you're not sort of into martial arts, then maybe think about a different sport you might have played or a different skill like music, where you might have been learning. The first thing you do when you're learning these kinds of things is you try to emulate somebody who's doing that thing very well. And, you know, in martial arts, it may be doing some katas or form movements where you're basically trying to do all of the punching and kicking motions exactly the same way as the experts that are teaching you. It may be playing a song on an instrument, trying to play it exactly like somebody who plays that song very well on a recording, or a teacher. And it may be, trying to emulate the golf swing, or the baseball swing of somebody that you really respect as a player that's a professional. The problem is, when you're looking at these things, when you're seeing these things, a lot of times you can tell that they're not the same, but you don't really know where to start. And so that's where the fixed strategy comes in. Because if you have a fixed strategy where you have a lot of checkpoints, and you can check each one off, and you can say, I'm doing this or I'm not doing that, then you'll actually be able to teach yourself. And that's the most important thing, because a lot of you guys are here watching these videos trying to learn how to teach yourself. Very independent. A lot of great players have taught themselves. But if you have this kind of framework where you can go through a list of things that you know you're working on and say, okay, I'm doing this, I made a mistake here, you're going to learn a lot faster, because you're not going to require input from anybody else as you're trying to learn. Unfortunately, if the strategy isn't very basic, then it's going to be hard to learn all that information at once. So basic and verifiable. And with poker, it's critically important that strategy not be too simple. Otherwise, you'll be losing money, or making mistakes that are costing you money while you're trying to learn. So we want a strategy that's simple, basic, and verifiable, but also profitable. And it's my belief that the ABC SNG series is that framework for creating verifiable decisions with no adjustment. Now, we do talk a lot in the series about pivot points, and how eventually, as you want to move from being a sort of a basic player to an expert player, the strategy will grow with you, and you'll be able to make adjustments in game to player stats and all sorts of other things. But the ABC SNG series, with no adjustment, does stand alone as a profitable strategy. And so the thing is, there are a lot of types of decisions in there that you need to learn how to make. And so we're going to sort of go through those things one by one. I'm going to go to another sports analogy, because I've sort of been trying to learn how to play golf, and I've been thinking a lot about the process of learning again, learning something new. It's actually one of the things that motivated this video, is the idea of trying to learn something new and knowing I'm not good at it, but not knowing, exactly where to start and how to fix it. And not, having the interest in spending $200 an hour for somebody to teach me how to play golf. I do recognize I'm bad at golf, and that's what we talked about, the first step. Sort of, we know when we're not good at something, we just don't know what to do. I can tell that because, my results on the course and on the driving range are not very good. So, a beginner without a framework would start changing things and really have no idea what to change. Sometimes it's your buddy on the golf course saying, "Oh, try this," or "Don't do that." But you don't want to sort of accept everything at face value from people who are, just as bad as you are, obviously. So we want to look for somebody who's an expert and see what they have to say about things. And so there's an older golfer named Ben Hogan. He's one of the most famous early power hitters. He wrote this book called 5 Lessons: The Modern Fundamentals of Golf. It was originally written as a series of articles. And it's the first time in literature that the golf power swing was really detailed in a book. And so this is sort of a classic and famous book that a lot of people are told to start learning how to hit their drives and their long shots with. Emulate this swing and you'll do it right. And it's a correct method. I mean, it's still a method today that, even though people make changes to, or minor changes to, and the golf swing is still evolving, there's so much correct information in it that if you just try to do exactly what he said perfectly, you'd have a pretty darn good golf swing without any adjustment. And then once you have that framework in place, mistakes start to become easier to determine, because they're deviations from that swing. They're deviations from the things he said in there. So, if you find that you're still hitting the ball badly, if the ball is always going right, well, you go back and you look and you say, okay, well, is my stance good? Is my backswing good? Is my, club face coming through straight? I mean, all the things that, start to become little details that you can look at individually and start to figure out whether you need to correct them or not. if you were doing it right, every shot would be perfect. So there's always, clues there as to what you're doing wrong. Um, and then if you're not always just kind of randomly trying to change things, if you're always trying to go back to this one fundamental strategy, you're going to learn faster, because you're going to be trying to repeat the same correct thing rather than trying to make a bunch of changes and not knowing whether the results are telling you that they're actually helping or not. So I say start with a proven strategy. And this is actually more critical for poker. The reason it's more critical for poker is because when you hit a golf shot, if it goes bad, you can tell it's bad. But poker actually provides inaccurate feedback, and it's one of the sort of great things about the game because it allows bad players to think that they're good and want to sit at the same table as world-class players. But it also can be very complicated to then, come up with your own strategy when it's constantly telling you that you made a correct play when in fact the play was wrong. It just happened to work out. So the problem with poker is you're going to need to stick with your strategy and not deviate from it for a lot longer to basically see the correct results. And so you're going to play a lot of games, and you're going to really try to just stick to this one basic strategy. And after a while, the results should converge. But we all know there's, bad luck in the short term. So you're not going to know just after a couple of games whether you're doing it right or not. And that's sort of a hard way to learn, because actually the brain, in the first 8 seconds after you do something is when your brain is most receptive to actually figuring out whether that was correct or not. And so this sort of long-term approach of learning is a little bit harder for your brain to actually accept. It's going to be more difficult, but it's definitely possible, because when you make a bad play but you're sticking to a basic strategy, you should be able to check your information at hand, like your PBJ sheets or your pre-flop ranges, and immediately say, oh, that was the wrong hand in that range. I shouldn't have played that there. But it has to be a correct strategy, or else you're not going to know. And one of the good things about sit and goes is that they can be systematic and automatic. The ABC sit and go system is a winning system, and it proves that. So not deviating from that system will eventually build you a very strong foundation, because you can learn them systematically, and you sort of have to, because of the fact that the poker is providing an accurate feedback as you're playing. So the fundamental concept for the ABC SNG series is pivot points. And these are basic ranges that should work most of the time against basic players at the low stakes. And like we said, they can be adjusted eventually for higher stakes players. But if you're playing the low stakes and struggling to beat them, playing the pivot point strategy unimproved is going to be about the best you can do as you're trying to learn the game. And trying to stick to that strategy is going to create the proper repetition. So you really need to start simple with these things that you can easily check yourself on. It's very easy to check your pre-flop strategy, right? Your pre-flop strategy is fixed. It shouldn't change until you start to make reads on players. And if you're really struggling to learn the game, I suggest you really just play a very basic pre-flop strategy. Very tight. Don't deviate. And then the PBJ ranges are also fixed and easy to check. I mean, when you're doing your analysis after playing the games, you should go back through all the hands that you weren't sure about and just do two things: check them in Sit and Go Wizard, which is pretty easy, but Sit and Go Wizard ranges may not be all that accurate. So the other thing you want to do is check it against your sheet, because if Sit and Go Wizard says you made the wrong decision, but the sheet says it's okay, I'd tend to actually defer to the sheet just to make sure you're continuing along with the same fixed strategy. There are a lot of reasons why eventually you're going to need to adjust those PBJ ranges, like the bubble and stack-based dynamics and that sort of thing. But as a beginning player, you really shouldn't be as concerned about that stuff, aside from maybe the bubble. On the bubble, being careful not to spew equity when you got a big stack, but you're in danger of being eliminated. Otherwise, the PBJ ranges are pretty good. The magic range is always an easy one. It's fixed. Ace, queen, and pocket eights. It gets looser or tighter, but if you just stick with that magic range, You're not going to be too far off no matter what when you're re-stealing, and the calling ranges are pretty easy to remember. So you've got these 4 things that if you just work on them one by one, first play your games and just focus on pre-flop strategy. Get that pre-flop strategy on a sheet next to your computer as you're playing, and then get a good PBJ sheet, and then make sure that you're working on magic range re-steals, and then make sure that you're working on good calls. One by one, you can kind of knock these things out. And those 4 things alone should really help a lot. If you're doing all those things correctly, everything else is just fine tuning. I would say that while you're learning, and you're learning these 4 things, the most important thing is that you check every decision, no matter how trivial. And the reason why I say that is because when you're trying to repeat and learn something for consistency, even if it seems trivial, it may not be. And that's one way you can expose leaks, because you sort of throw away a garbage hand, not thinking, oh, I'm 5 blinds deep. Actually, I should be shoving pretty widely on the button. That's going to expose some of your leaks right off the bat. You got to check every decision, and even when you find that, oh, it was trivial and I was right, that's actually going to reinforce, the correct play. So even checking something and finding out you were right afterwards that it was a trivial decision is not a waste of time, because it's going to help, pound those things into place. But if you can accept that you're going to a lot of times be feeling like you're wasting your time, you're going to more quickly find those leaks that you didn't know you had in these fundamental concepts. So check every decision, and these elements alone really should significantly improve your game. All right, and do not choose to deviate. The thing about choosing to deviate when learning is it actually will only harm your game. Every time you choose to deviate and you say, oh, I think I know better than the basic strategy, you're going to harm your game. You have to strive for a complete and solid foundation in your game before mixing up your play. Otherwise, you won't know why you're mixing up your play or how to do it correctly, and you won't adjust correctly either, because you won't know the basic ranges that you need to adjust from. So, for example, with pivot points, let's say we know we need to get a little bit tighter or a little bit looser. By knowing the basic pivot points, you're going to have a place to start adjusting from and an end point that you shouldn't go past when you're adjusting from. And a lot of beginners tend to over-adjust when they're trying to mix up their play and adjust for the HUD stats of different opponents or whatever. They just go way overboard, and then they also harm the results of trying to learn this proper foundation at the same time. And the crazy thing is that the deviation will really just confuse you more, because even as we said before, the poker results won't tell you if your deviation was correct or not. So not only won't you be building the proper foundation, you won't have any idea whether the deviation was correct. So I really would urge you not to do things that move away from this basic strategy until you really know it well, because it'll overall extend the amount of time it takes for you to learn. And so it's frustrating, right? You want to be a good player, you want to get better faster, and you feel like, oh, I'm going to start trying to make these expert plays. But in the long run, it's actually slowing you down. It's sort of a tortoise and hare type thing. It's that if you have a goal to get better, doing this will actually hurt you, and it feels emotionally hard not to deviate from the strategy, but you really need to put that aside and say, this is for the sake of trying to get better. Taking it back to the golf swing analogy a little bit, swinging this is sort of an intuitive example. Swinging the club 1,000 times right is going to be better than swinging the club 1,000 times right and 1,000 times wrong. And swinging the club 10,000 times, which is probably what it's going to take to actually, really lock in some of that muscle memory and get better, is going to be a lot better than swinging the club 10,000 times right and 10,000 times wrong. Because think about it, not only are the 10,000 times wrong going to take time to do, you're not at the end going to feel as if you understand those concepts as well as if you've just done it 10,000 times right and skipped all the wrong times. When I was learning how to play violin, I had a teacher who told me but there's some muscle memory involved in doing something. And if you do something wrong, to correct that mistake, you need to do it the same amount of times right. That'll get you back to the point where you can kind of learn something new, and then you need to do it the same amount of times right again to actually master it. So in this case, swinging 10,000 times right would be better than swinging 10,000 times wrong, plus 10,000 times right to correct it, plus 10,000 times right again to lock it in. I mean, it would take 3 times as long if you're willing to deviate in that situation than it would to just try to do the thing right to begin with and learn it and move on. So don't slow yourself down. Don't if you really want to get better and you really want to move up fast, don't deviate. There's just no benefit to it. All right, working on new situations. Once the basic stuff is done, once you've got those 4 key things, pre-flop, PBJ, calling ranges, and magic range, then you're going to start to have some areas where you need to start making decisions, and it's not going to be so clear-cut. And so once you're done with that, then this is the strategy that you're going to use to try to figure things out. You're going to want to move on to a specific and focused problem. And you're going to want to identify those problems basically by looking at the things that caused you the most headache while you were playing. If you had a situation in a game you just didn't know how to solve it, you need to make a note of it, and that's the thing you're going to want to start with when you're doing your review later on. You want to take that skill and you want to break it down to a sort of fundamental thing. Like, what's the basic problem that it was? Okay, somebody raised and I had a hand. I was in late position behind them, and I wasn't sure whether I should be calling behind or 3-betting or folding. So you want to break that down into what's the sort of skill that was causing you trouble. It's that we don't know what our real 3-betting range is. Okay, so if you can do that, if you can categorize all of those tough decisions, then you're gonna say, okay, well, now we're gonna focus on 3-betting. What are my 3-betting ranges? And that's gonna be what you're gonna focus on for a while. Usually, if you're having trouble sort of categorizing the fundamental skill that caused you trouble, it could be on the street that you actually got trouble, or it could be earlier in the hand. So, say for example, you got pot committed on the river and you felt like you needed to call with a hand that you knew was beat with. Probably, actually, the fundamental skill was not river calls. The fundamental skill was, bet sizing, and it probably came earlier in the hand. So make sure you're carefully categorizing the troubles that you're having, and then once you realize you're having a trouble in a certain area, you want to focus on that. You want to do all your review to try to find hands that are similar to that and figure out how to play them. And the best way to figure out how to fix these problems is going to be by using the process of elimination. All right, process of elimination is a really strong skill. Also asking forum members, but again, don't forget you might be getting advice from people who don't know a lot better than you do. And once you come up with the correct play, or what you think is the correct play, then stick with that decision. Make sure that in every situation where that comes up, you don't deviate from it. Keep noting hands where it came up. And, after a while, filter your Hold'em Manager database and take a look at the results of those types of hands. Because only after a bunch of hands are you going to be able to figure out whether the results of the change in your play, or what you've decided you think is the correct strategy, is actually going to be correct or not. So the most critical skill that you're going to need to use when you're trying to figure out these difficult decisions is process of elimination. And this is kind of a cool skill because poker decisions are pretty much strictly limited to a few different decisions that you can make. You can fold, you can call, you can raise, or you can shove. And in sit and goes, actually, a lot of times raising is even out of the question because later on in the hand, your stack size is going to be short compared to the size of the pot. So it's really going to be fold, call, or shove. And when you get into these types of situations that you don't know exactly what the correct way to play is, you want to consider the fact that there's only a few options. And a lot of times, one of the options is clearly wrong. So you've got maybe 3 things you could consider. And, if you can get rid of 1 or 2 of those things, then you're going to, by process of elimination, get to the correct answer. Or, at worst, probably down to 2 decisions which you're trying to weigh against each other. Once you get to that point, if you've got 2 decisions left, Consider the goals of the hand. Like I've got a strong hand, I'm trying to get it all in. I've got a weak player that I'm playing against, versus I'm playing a strong player who's very tight. I'm not sure how good my hand is. Um, Consider what you're trying to accomplish in the hand, and usually one of those two things will be the most correct decision. Um, if your goal of your hand is to get somebody all in, you may say, okay, well, betting here is clearly correct over checking, right? Because you want to get more chips into the pot. And if they're a bad player, you say, well, betting bigger is probably correct because I want to get more chips in the pot, and they're likely to call. So if you get down to one decision, that's actually the best. But if you get down to two decisions, usually you can sort of noodle out the rest of the way which one is going to be the most optimal based on the result you want from the hand you're trying to play. So process of elimination should really help because it gets rid of all the easy stuff and it eliminates it down to one or two things. If you can't figure it out on your own, you can always take it to the forum and say, well, got to this point, I used process of elimination. I couldn't decide whether to raise or shove, or I couldn't decide whether to call or shove. And then people are going to help you sort of explore the ins and outs of what's going to make those two results, make one of those two results better than the other. And then you conclude a final play is correct and you move on. And again, you're going to want to review your results of playing a certain line or a certain hand a certain way, and then look at your hold'em manager and figure out whether that's working for you in the long run. So the method is really to start with what you know for certain and lock it in through repetition. And then figure out if your long-term results are telling you that changes need to be made. And that's going to be a systematic approach, because what's going to happen is you're going to have done the same thing 1,000 times, and you're going to be able to tell from those 1,000 times whether it was profitable in the long run. You can change your PBJ ranges over time. I wouldn't do it in any less than 1,000 games, and I would assume that at the low stakes, they're going to be pretty profitable without much alteration. And then once you get past the sort of basic skills of pre-flop, PBJ, magic range, and calling, then you're going to want to use this process of elimination, start to move on to harder topics. You're going to want to start to look at adjustment, and you're going to want to start to look at player-based decisions. But you just can't do that until you've locked in the fundamental strategy. And you're going to want to solve tough spots by using process of elimination. So you can learn sit and goes on your own, and it's really about how you approach it, because the information is all out there, and there is a very good strategy on Drag the Bar that you can use to sort of get this stuff under your belt quickly. Coaching could speed things up, but it's really not necessary. It's also not super efficient, because a lot of time you're spending a lot of money on things that you could have figured out on your own, whereas later on the coaching will really help you to move up in stakes because it's focusing on things that you really had a hard time fixing on your own. I suggest keeping a notebook every day and making a log of the things that you're working on. That's also a suggestion that came from Ben Hogan's book, but it's something that I used to do previously when I was learning sit and goes. It helps because you'll see what you were doing on a previous day, and you'll see what the things you were trying to accomplish are, and you'll remember to think about those things during your next session. And you'll see that as you learn those things and move on, the things you're focusing on will change. But it helps you to create that sort of continuity between playing sessions. Always read the last entry of your notebook prior to starting a new entry or a new session, and that's really just going to help sort of bridge the gap, and it's going to lock in some of those concepts quicker because you're going to refresh your brain quickly on them. You're not going to let them sit dormant once you actually start to learn them. It's also going to be good because you're going to have something at hand that you can use to mark down the hard hands while you're playing, because it's hard to remember after a session of lots and lots of hands those couple tough decisions that you were having at the time. Work from the basic solution, PBJ or pre-flop or whatever, and then if no solution exists, then try to use process of elimination to figure out the correct answer, and if you're still unsure, then take it to the forum. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it didn't seem too basic, because I think that's something that a lot of people could benefit from, even if they feel like it's sort of fluffy, not a lot of poker strategy, obviously, but really I think being systematic about how you learn is the thing that's going to accelerate your learning the fastest. So if you can really follow the advice in this video, I think you're going to learn a lot quicker. And that's everyone's goal. I mean, that's why you're here. That's why you're paying money and spending time watching videos. So, it seems straightforward. You may say, oh, that's obvious. But, actually following this method, actually having somebody lay it out and for you to follow, I think is going to be really valuable if you take advantage of it. So, I hope you got something out of this video. And this is Greg Jones saying good luck at the tables.